Good evening, everyone. I don't understand, Bhagyashri. Snehal, where you are asking me to add her? I'm giving you this command. You can unmute yourself. Yes, Bhagyashri, I don't understand.
सर वो क्लास में ऐड नहीं हो रही बोल रही वेट फॉर होस्ट शो कर रहा है ऐसा
No,
बोल रहा
she is probably trying with some other link. All right.
है
So
ओके
ask her to join with the recent one, which one you have used to join. Maybe she's trying with some another link.
ओके सर
Because I don't see anyone is waiting in the waiting room. I don't have enabled that feature over here. Meeting info. No, I don't have enable any waiting rooms. Yeah. All right, let's start with the session. It's 208. So we are going to start with another next concept, a whole new concept called as methods. Now see, many times during when we were doing the practice programs, I have told you that if you would define a class, all right, if you would define a class, let me just try to open any one of them so that while explaining it would make a sense to every one of us. Now see, for example, if this is a class, all right, class have two different forms of members. Class could have two different forms of members. All of the variables that you have defined inside a class, like you have defined an integer variable, you may have defined some of the string variables, date or boolean, or any of the data type. It could be of primitive, it could be of S object even. So all of the variables that you have defined inside a class, along with all of the methods that you have defined, you have created inside the class. So combinedly, they are called as members of a class. So whenever we say the member of a class, so member could be what? Member could be either a variable, member could be a variable, or member could also be a method. All right, member could also be a method. So what I'm saying, when we say that, let me try to show you members of a class. So the members of the class could be like, members of the class could be the variables, and members of the class could also be the methods. All right, members of the class could also be a methods. So if you have defined a variable or else you have defined a method, both of them are considered to be the members of the classes. Now, methods are of two types. We are going to start with them. Methods are of two types. Let me mute you guys. Yes. All right. So members are of two types. Members are of two types. The first is function, and the second type is procedures. Procedures. All right. So members, there are of two types. Methods, sorry, there are of two types, functions and procedures. Methods are of two types, functions and procedures. All right. If we will start with once again. So whenever we define a class could have two different forms of members. All of the variables that you have defined inside a class, they are also the members of the class, along with the methods. If you have any method inside a class, you know what is a variable. We have defined so many of them. Variables, whenever we define, we first of all have to mention the data type like integer, string, boolean, date, time, ID, long, right? There are so many of them. So all of the variables and all of the methods that you have defined inside a class, typically they are called as members of the classes. Now let's come to the methods wala part. The methods, there are of two types, functions and procedures. Methods, there are of two types, functions and procedures. Let's now understand what is a procedure, what is a method, what is a function, what is a procedure, what is a function. All right. Let's start with the procedure. See, both of them is first of all is method. Both of them is first of all is a method. Both of them is a what? They are the forms of methods. Now, procedures are basically those kinds of method. Procedures are basically those kinds of methods that does not return anything to the calling environment. Now, this is a typical definition, a technical definition. Procedures are that kind of methods, those kinds of methods. Procedures are the methods. Whenever they are called inside a program, if you call a procedure, it would not going to return anything to the calling environment. It would not going to return anything to the calling environment. So sometimes it is also called as fire and forgot. That means whenever you would call a procedure, it would perform the operation, what it's supposed to do. It would perform the operation, it would perform that execution, it would perform the execution of that business logic for which it has been intended, for which it has been created. So it would going to perform that operation, but then it wouldn't provide you any sort of acknowledgement. It would not give you anything as a return. We're going to understand this. Don't worry. Just try to concentrate on the English meaning of all this. Otherwise, I'm telling you, and every time I used to say this, the concepts of programming, it's always better to understand them while programming. So if you really wanted to learn a programming language, the most appropriate way to do this is to actually code them, right? So, but still, I always try to explain the concept as far as possible. But otherwise, even in my opinion, the most appropriate way is actually to learn the concept while programming, while actually doing the codings. All right. So we will going to understand this. We will going to create those kinds of methods. We're going to create procedures, and we would going to see like how a procedure is executed, but it doesn't return say anything. And by the way, now understand when this is something which is important. Let me see whether it has been written or not. Yeah, this keyword void. This is something which is important. Technically, this is important. See, whenever you have any such kind of method which doesn't returns anything to the calling environment, whenever you have any such kind of method that doesn't returns anything to the calling environment, we have to specify this along with the keyword called as void. And this has to be put, this has to be put in the beginning of the method, in the name, before the name of the method. You're going to understand. Don't worry. Just listen and try to concentrate. So the default return type of every procedure is void. The default return type of if it is returning you void means nothing. If it is, if there is a method that returns void, means it doesn't return anything. All right. If there's a method which returns void, which actually means it's not going to return anything, then it is called as procedure. Because if it would return you something, for example, if it would return you an integer, or maybe a string, or maybe a date, certainly that is not a procedure. Because if a method claims that I am procedure, In that case, the method should not return anything to the calling environment. And so the return type must always be what? It must always be void. It must always be void. So that is what is the procedure. All right. Now, on the other hand, functions. Functions are that kind of method which always returns something to the calling environment. So if a function has been called, if a function has been called, it must always return something. It must always return something. So let me add one statement over here. Thus, a function always have return statement. The function always have return statement. Your procedure doesn't have it. Why? Because the return type is void. Whereas the function always returns something to the calling environment. Now that could be any of the primitive data type. It could also be an S object. It could also be an S object. It could also be a primitive data type, like the function could return you an integer, single integer or list of integer. Function could maybe return you a single string or maybe list of string, multiple strings, multiple IDs, single ID. So it could return, it definitely returns something. It could be anything. It could be a primitive data type. It could also be a S object data type record. But whatever it is, it is very much sure that it returns something. See, try to just understand. You go to a party, usually in the birthday parties, this is a concept. So there is a concept of return gift. When you go to a party, a birthday party, you take something for the kid, for the birthday boy, birthday girl, and you propose that gift to him. Now, when you are returning back, they would provide you, the parents would provide you something in a return gift. So that is what is the concept. You go to a party, you spend something, you give gifts over there, and in return, you will also get something. So whenever you call a function would execute whatever it has supposed to do. But in the same time, it would also return you something, all right, as an acknowledgement. So this is what is a function. So methods, there are of two types. Methods, there are of two types. Even before that, members of the class are of two types. A class could have two different forms of members, variables and methods. Variables and methods. Now methods are again of two types. Procedures and functions. Procedures and functions. Procedures are those methods that doesn't return anything and the default return type is always void. Whereas functions are those methods which actually return something to the calling environment. That something could be a primitive data type record. It could also be an S object data type record. All right. Let's now start with the procedures. Procedures or function, both of them. Let me once again try to draw a diagram. I hope you guys either take the screenshot or maybe you just draw it. What I was trying to say was, when we say members of a class, there are two types. There are of two types. Variables and methods. Variables and methods. These are the two different forms of members. Methods are again of two types. Procedures and functions. Functions, right? Procedures and functions. Now, both of them, both of them, whether it's a procedure, whether it's a function, there are of two types. Parameterized and, excuse me, Yes. So there are two types of methods, rather, whether it's a procedure, whether it's a function. Parameterized and a non-parameterized procedures or functions. So typically these are the two types, and these two are the types of methods. These two are the types of methods. That means you can say that procedures are of two types: parameterized procedures, non-parameterized procedures. Even the functions, there are of two types: non-parameterized and parameterized functions. All right. Please take a screenshot of this, or else you can draw a rough diagram for now. Later on, you can make pair of this. All right. So now what does it means by a parameterized procedure and what does it means by a non-parameterized? Let's now start with this. See, I am going to explain you the concept. If I am explaining this related to procedure, it means actually this is same to function as well. All right, because I have told you this is, the parameterized and non-parameterized. This is related to methods. It is not related to procedures and functions. If the methods, there are of two types: parameterized, non-parameterized, that means procedures are again of two types, functions are again of the two types. All right. So this applies to both of them. Now, let's start with a non-parameterized procedure. So first of all, let's understand the syntax. And this syntax is a common syntax of procedure. So whenever you would define a procedure is ultimately a method. And I have told you this. For so many times, I have told you that if you would find a name anywhere in a program, if you would find a name along with an opening and a closing round bracket, if you would found a name inside a program, if you would found a name along with an opening and a closing bracket, this means it's a method. It's a method. उसके बाद हम सोचेंगे कि whether this method is a procedure or it's a function, वो बात की बात है, वो सोचेंगे उस बारे में. बट सबसे पहली चीज जो एकदम ऐसा पहली नजर में जिसको समझ में आ जाना चाहिए वो ये कि इफ यू वुड एनीवेयर इन योर प्रोग्राम, इफ you'd find a name along with this opening and a closing bracket, kachori, so that means it's a method. It's a method. Now if just what to say, in front of that name, if you would see a void keyword, that means this is a method, but it doesn't return anything. The return type is void. That means it's a procedure. Because in a function, you would going to see something like integer here where I have highlighted, or maybe a string or something else. How come this is possible here? Zoom. Just give me a moment. I don't know what is happening with Zoom. We have purchased the license, but somehow it automatically get converted to the basic version. I don't know what is happening. Anyways, so I have 10 more minutes for this meeting. I'll try to explain this within 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to set up more meeting. Let's see. Yeah. So anywhere in a program, if you would find a name along with this opening and a closing a round bracket, so first of all, that's a method. If the method is prefixed with void keyword, this means it's a procedure. Why? Because any such method that doesn't returns anything to the calling environment, that means the return type is void. That a type of method is called as procedures. That a type of method which the return type is void is called as procedures. And you must also have access specifier. All right. Can any one of you here would tell me how many different forms of access specifiers you know? And I am giving you this command and I hope nobody. Yeah, chal. Yes. How many different forms of access specifiers you know? How many different forms of access specifiers we have in Salesforce in Apex programming? Yes. Sarfraz, if you are saying something, I cannot hear you. Sorry. How many different forms of access specifiers you know? Guys, come on. These are some of the basic questions. Yes, Shadab.
Sir, private, public,
Mm-hmm.
global,
Mm-hmm.
protected.
Protected. So there are 4 different forms of access specifiers: public, private, global, and protected. Now, if I am defining a class, which one of them I cannot use? Yes. Which one of them I cannot use for a class? Come on. Come on.
Global.
No, 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 not global. It's protected. It's protected. A class cannot be protected. But when you are defining, please go on mute, everyone. When you are defining a method, and you have to specify the access specifiers at that time. So a method could be public. Method could also be private. Method could also be global. Even method could also be protected. Even the method could also be protected. Now I'm giving you this in assignment. What happens when you define a class or a method as public? What happens when you define a class or a method as protected? What happens when you define a method or a class as private and global? Please go and have your research and submit whatever your findings are into your WhatsApp group. All right. The better would be, if you would create 4 columns and you would try to make a distinguished study of all those. All right, please write it down. And this one, by the way, is an interview question. Understood? So you should mind this question. All right. So this is a way to define a method. Now, what we are studying? Non-parameterized procedures. See, whenever the parameters are being given, now listen this very carefully. Whenever the parameters are given, they are always given inside this kachori, inside this opening and a square, opening and closing round bracket. So if you don't see anything over here, if there is no masala, that means this is empty. If this is an empty kachori, it means it's a non-parameterized procedure. It's a procedure. Why it's a procedure? Because return type is void. Otherwise, if it is going to be a method, it's going to be a function. So if you see any such kind of method, any such kind of procedure, any such kind of function where you don't see anything, an empty brackets means there's no parameters. If there is no parameters, it becomes a non-parameterized method. In this case, because it's void, it becomes non-parameterized procedure. So there are a few of the examples of this. I'm going to take it by tomorrow. All right. I'm going to take it by tomorrow. And we're going to see like how we can create a class, define a procedure, define a non-parameterized procedure. We can call them and we're going to see them. Then we're going to start with the parameterized procedures. All right. That's all for today. That's all. And go with that assignment which I have given you about access specifiers. That is very important, guys. That's very important. All right, folks. That's all for today. You have any question? Yes. Anybody wanted to ask anything? Please go ahead. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
actually,
Shadab.
I'm not able to execute sir, that related records. Sir.
Why don't you have given me your programs, like what error you are getting, what is your code? So I obviously would, if you wanted me to debug, I obviously would require to see your code, right? Please take the screenshot of your code and the error what you're getting. Send it to your WhatsApp group. Don't send anything to my personal. And then I'm going to resolve that. Don't worry.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yes, any questions? All right, then. Thank you so much for joining.